I was 39 when my sister told me that my daughter wasn't welcome at her wedding. 39 is a strange age to be told that the child you raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights is suddenly a problem, like she's a scuff mark on someone's white floor. I remember the afternoon the message arrived because the kettle had just begun to sing, and the house smelled faintly of lemon oil and the lavender sachets I kept tucked between folded towels. It was an ordinary day until it wasn't until my phone lit up and the words rearranged all the furniture inside my chest. I set the mug down too fast. The spoon chimed against porcelain and skittered across the counter, leaving a crescent of tea. The message from my sister Amelia was short and perfumed with her particular brand of diplomacy. She said the venue had strict rules, that the event was adults only, that she hoped I would understand, and that she knew Lily would be just as happy to watch the live stream from home. It was written like a brochure with careful spacing between sentences, like she could sell the exclusion to me if she dressed it in enough courtesy. 6 words did all the damage. Lily is too young to attend. Too young. My Lily, who was 17 and balanced on the lip of adulthood like a high diver waiting for the whistle. My Lily, who rose before dawn to take extra shifts at the bakery, and who left cash on the kitchen table pretending I hadn't noticed her tucking it beneath the napkin holder with the chipped blue birds. My Lily, who came home late on Tuesdays because she was rehearsing Prokofiev in the school auditorium, her fingers smelling faintly of rosin from the violin bow. She had shoulders I recognized from photographs of my mother at the same age, a stubborn grace, an unwillingness to hunch even when the world handed her heavy things. I left the phone face down on the counter and pressed my palms to the cool edge of the sink, the stainless steel, nothing like the ocean, but just cold enough to make me breathe. A part of me, a very practiced, very old part, started flipping through the handbook of rationalizations. There are venue rules, I told myself. It's their day. There must be liability issues. But then, the quieter, braver part of me, the one that only woke up when the house was empty, whispered that I knew better. I knew Amelia. I knew the way she curated her life like a glossy magazine spread, cropping out whatever didn't fit the palette. I knew her talent for labels too loud, too sensitive, too much, too little, slapped onto people the way a shopgirl snaps price tags quick and without apology. I am Charlotte, the older sister. In our childhood home, I was the one who learned to cook first, who figured out hospital forms, who memorized the mortgage payment dates. I was also the one who grew up faster than she wanted to, because someone had to. Our father was a quiet man whose love arrived by way of shelves he hammered into place, and engines he coaxed back to life, and our mother was a woman who believed the family's sorrows should be folded into napkins and laundered before anyone else saw them. We laughed at the table we served seconds to guests, we kept the ugliness behind doors that stuck in summer and swelled in winter. By the time we were teenagers, Amelia had figured out that charm could be currency, and I had learned that responsibility when practiced daily feels less like a virtue and more like a harness. I wore it a long time. So when I had Lily at 22 after a love story that skidded off the road and into a ditch, I told myself I could carry both of us. I did. I carried us through morning sickness and student loans, through feverish nights and first-grade recitals, through the long quiet after her father married someone else, and the even longer quiet of not knowing what to tell a little girl about absence. I worked in admissions at the community college and later as a registrar in a private school where parents looked at me like I was a clerk, holding a key to their children's golden futures. I learned to be soft-spoken with people who were used to getting their way. I learned not to flinch when someone said I was so accommodating, like they were complimenting a sofa for being easy to rearrange. Lily grew into a person who saw the invisible things. When I came home late with a headache, she set a bowl of water and sliced cucumbers on the table like we were in a spa, instead of our snug kitchen with its scratched linoleum. When I tried to hide the past due notice under the placemat, she pretended not to see for a day, and then mentioned casually that the bakery needed someone to prep dough at 5 a.m. on Saturdays. I told her absolutely not. You're still a kid. And she said, "I like the quiet before sunrise, Mom," and that was that. She has her father's eyes and my mother's chin, and a laugh that doesn't ask permission to exist. All of this flashed through me in the seconds after I read Amelia's message. That and an image Lily in the dress we had picked out last week, pale green and simple, the color of new leaves after rain. She had held it up in front of the mirror and swayed to make the skirt move like water, and she'd said, "Do you think Aunt Amelia will like it?" in that careful way people speak when they are really asking, "Will I be welcome?" I had said. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course." And I had believed it because I chose to. How much of mothering is choosing the kinder version of the future and walking toward it like a lighthouse? I turned the phone over again and read the message through twice more. There was an attachment, an image of the venue's policy. It said, "No children under 16. I stared until the words blurred, then counted on my fingers like an idiot. 17. My daughter was 17. The math did not care about curated aesthetics. The math said she was allowed. I felt the slow heat of humiliation pool in my chest, and then felt it turn into something cleaner and sharper anger. Not the wild kind that burns down barns, but the steady kind that powers the train all the way up the mountain. The kind that makes your voice very calm. I wrote back, "Lily is 17, she meets the policy." And then because I could already hear the excuses lining up like well-dressed guests, I added, "If this is not about policy, please say what it is about." There is a particular cruelty in the professional delay. Amelia replied 40 minutes later with the same tone people use to decline calendar invitations. She said the head count was tight. She said her fiancé's family had expectations about atmosphere. She said the photographer had recommended keeping the vibe elegant and adult, and she hoped I would understand. She did not explain how a girl who wakes before dawn to earn her own spending money would ruin an atmosphere, how a violinist who volunteers at the hospice should be hidden from photographs. She did not say, "I worry that Lily's presence will pull focus from me." She did not say, "I am still that girl who needs the room to mirror me back to myself." And your daughter is a reminder that people can shine without permission. She did not say, "I am afraid of her youth the way a chandelier is afraid of a storm." When Lily came home from school, she found me at the table with the dress in my lap. I had planned to choreograph the conversation, to place cushions under every hard edge, to tell a version of the story that would leave fewer marks. But my mouth betrayed me and said the truth. "Your aunt doesn't want you at the wedding." I watched her face try on a dozen expressions in 30 seconds: confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger, and then that last one that broke me, the quiet acceptance of a girl who has trained herself to make peace with other people's choices. She shrugged, "Too big, the way you do when you want to throw something off your shoulders, but it sticks." "That's okay," she said. "I can help you get ready." "No," I said too loudly, "it's not okay. We ate scrambled eggs for dinner because eggs are what you cook when the day has been unkind and you need something warm and frankly doable." We were quiet. I pretended the eggs were interesting. She pretended the yolks didn't taste like disappointment. After she went to her room and took out her violin, and I listened from the hallway as she played scales she could do in her sleep. There is a tone she uses when she is sad and trying not to show it, clean, careful, like a person apologizing for taking up sonic space. I leaned my head against the door jamb and let the music go through me like a necessary kind of ache. Later, when the house had settled around us and the sink was empty, and the dress was back on its hanger like a quiet witness, I texted my mother. I didn't expect her to take sides. She is a weather vane in human form, always spinning toward the most immediate approval. But I told her anyway. She replied with a kind of breezy sadness that felt like a script. "It's Amelia's day. Let's not make a fuss. Lily will have her time." I stared at the words until they felt obscene. I thought of all the times we hadn't made a fuss. How silence had been our family's wallpaper. How Amelia learned to call her wants standards, and how I learned to call my needs inconvenient. I am not a woman who likes revenge. That's what I used to say because it made me sound gracious and unbothered. The truth is, I have simply practiced a form of surrender that mistakes biting your tongue for benevolence. I have learned that a smile can be a bandage and a weapon both. But that night something in me refused to make itself small. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling and thought, what is the shape of justice here? What would it look like if I believed that my daughter deserves to be seen in the light? A memory answered me. Lily at 11, standing on the school stage in a borrowed black dress, her hair pinned back with the concentration of a surgeon, her violin tucked under her chin like a secret. She began to play, and the chatter in the cafeteria turned auditorium evaporated like mist. At the end, an old man, someone's grandfather with a face worn kind by time, stood to clap first. He looked at me as if he knew how many mornings it takes to build a moment like that. Afterward, he pressed my hand and said, "She has a way of stilling the room." The wedding would have a room. It would have chairs in ridiculous rows, and a florist who knew the Latin names for everything, and a quartet who could sight read Pachelbel in their sleep. It would have cameras and white porcelain and a cake that required a structural engineer. It would have a microphone. It would have the brassy shine of my sister's best self conjured into a day. And my daughter, whose music-stilled rooms was banned for being too young. I lay awake until the ceiling took on the gray color of almost morning. By then, the plan had stopped feeling like rage and started feeling like purpose. I thought about how power looks in our family: who holds the envelopes, who speaks into microphones, who writes checks, who is allowed to claim the word elegant, and who is expected to be grateful. I thought about my grandmother's locket in the back of my jewelry box, the one with the tiny sepia photo of a woman whose eyes said I did what I had to do. I thought about the emails I could send, the policies I could read too closely, the contracts that had clauses Amelia had probably skimmed. At 4:30 I got out of bed, quietly careful not to wake Lily, and made a list in the dim light of the hallway nightlight. The registrar in me, the woman who can sniff out a single missing signature in a stack of 800 forms, put on her glasses. The mother in me, the woman who has stood in too many rooms where she was expected to swallow a smaller portion, sharpened her pencil. I mapped the guest list inside my head. I diagrammed the seating. I drafted emails with the kind of politeness that pierces. I remembered that elegance is not the sole province of people who rent out vineyards. It belongs to anyone who carries herself like she does not owe the room an apology for existing. By the time Lily's alarm chirped softly, because even her alarm is gentle, I had my answer. I would not beg. I would not ask for crumbs. I would not explain my child to people who had already decided to be blind. Instead, I would take the thing they worshipped most, their image, their meticulous tableau, and I would place my daughter in all her ordinary radiance at the center of it. Not as a disruption, but as the truth they had chosen to edit out. I made pancakes the way she likes, with blueberries that burst and leave little halos on the griddle. She sat sleepy and smiling, because pancakes mean the day might be kind. I told her I loved her more than the order of things, more than other people's expectations, more than my own long habit of keeping the peace. I did not tell her the plan yet, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to carry this one just for a morning on my own shoulders. She kissed my cheek and went to school with her violin case bumping her leg in rhythmic companionship. The house felt suddenly like a stage that had been swept and lit and is now waiting for the first line. When I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, I thought of something my father said once the week before he died, when we sat on the porch drinking tea that had gone cold while the summer cicadas sawed at the air. He looked at our mother through the window, where she was arranging flowers in a chipped vase, and said, "Your mother believes in order, Charlotte. There is use in that. But order without mercy is just another name for fear." Then he looked at me. "You," he said, "were born with mercy and a spine. You'll figure it out." I think I finally understood what he meant. Mercy is not the absence of anger. It is the decision to build something better with it. A spine is not a refusal to bend. It is the willingness to stand when the wind has opinions. I opened my email. I contacted the venue. I reviewed the contract Amelia forwarded weeks ago. I spoke to a coordinator who had the cheerful tone of someone who has seen more family dramas than a daytime soap. I asked very polite, very pointed questions about age policies and ID checks and performance schedules and vendor passes. I closed my computer and stared at my hands, which trembled just slightly, as if something important had just shifted weight inside me. That evening, Lily stood in the doorway of my room while I pinned my hair and asked tentative, "Do you still want to go to the wedding?" Mom, I met her eyes in the mirror and said, steady as a song held on a long breath, "I want to go where you belong." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction like a bird easing its wings back into its body after testing the air. She didn't need to know anything else yet. She only needed to feel the ground firming under her feet. I folded the pale green dress carefully into its garment bag and hung it on the back of her door. I placed the black velvet case with her bow and spare strings beside her backpack. Then, in the quiet hour between dinner and sleep, I took my grandmother's locket from the box and fastened it around my neck. The tiny clasp clicked shut with a sound that felt like yes. Here is what I know. There are moments when the script other people hand you is so threadbare it tears in your hands, and what you do next becomes the real story. This was one of those moments. My sister believed in rules that bent toward her mirror. My mother believed in quiet that kept the picture pretty. But I have a daughter who believes in the kind of music that makes strangers forget to breathe. I was done pretending those things could sit politely at the same table. So I ironed my dress for the wedding with the same care I ironed Lily's. I checked my bag for safety pins and tissues and a small roll of tape because someone always needs tape. I steadied my breathing. I slept well for the first time in days. In the morning, the sky was the soft gray that looks like a vow. I made coffee and packed a lunch and texted Nancy, my friend, with a laugh like wind chimes, who replied with a single heart and the words, "Say it with your whole self." I picked up the garment bag and the violin case and paused at Lily's door. She turned sleepy-eyed from the mirror and smiled at me like we were standing on a pier together, looking out over water we were about to enter. I smiled back. We were. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky that felt strangely indifferent, pale and hushed, as though it had already decided it wouldn't intervene in what was about to unfold. I brewed coffee that I barely tasted, packed my bag with all the small necessities a mother thinks of: pins, tissues, mints, and zipped Lily's violin case with deliberate calm. She floated through the house in her green dress like a note searching for its song, quiet but luminous, her hair pinned simply at the back of her head. She didn't ask if she was going, not out of disinterest, but out of something heavier, the instinct children learn when they've already braced themselves for disappointment. We drove in near silence, the hum of the tires filling the spaces between us. My hands on the steering wheel were steady, but inside my thoughts pressed against each other like restless crowds waiting for a door to open. Every corner we turned brought us closer to Amelia's carefully orchestrated spectacle: her day, her rules, her image. But I was no longer the older sister who bent herself into a smaller shape just to keep peace at the table. Not today. The venue stood grand against the gray sky, a stately house dressed in ribbons of ivory and flowers that had likely been flown in overnight. Guests shimmered in tuxedos and gowns, the air perfumed with money and expectation. I could see my mother near the entrance, her pearls perfectly aligned, her smile brittle as porcelain. When she caught sight of Lily, her face flickered a storm cloud passing over the sun and then quickly rearranged itself into bland civility. She opened her mouth, perhaps to say what she had said all my life: "Don't make a fuss," but I walked past her before the words could take shape. The ceremony hall was everything Amelia had dreamed: chandeliers dripping like crystal waterfalls, pews lined with silk, and a string quartet playing Vivaldi so softly it was almost apologetic. Amelia herself glided at the far end in a gown that could have paid someone's mortgage. Her smile sharpened into perfection. She looked like she was about to step into a painting immortalized in curated elegance. And for a moment I almost faltered, almost felt that old pull of guilt for intruding on someone else's portrait. But then Lily shifted beside me, clutching the violin case, her eyes darting toward the stage where the musicians played. I remembered her practicing late into the night, her music carrying through the walls like quiet defiance, her bow carving sorrow into beauty. She was not too young. She was not a mistake to edit out. She was my daughter, and she belonged in any room her presence graced. When the officiant called for silence, I rose. My heels clicked against the polished floor, and heads turned, whispers following like ripples in water. Amelia's smile faltered, confusion tugging at the corners of her mouth. I didn't look at her. Instead, I walked to the musicians, handed Lily her violin, and nodded. She understood immediately. She always had. The first note she played sliced the air open. It wasn't background music, wasn't decorative. It was commanding, raw, and achingly beautiful. The room stilled as though oxygen itself had paused to listen. Guests who had been fidgeting with programs lowered their hands, eyes lifted, breaths slowed. Even Amelia, radiant and furious in white, could not compete with the sound that spilled from Lily's violin. In that moment, I didn't see chandeliers or flowers or the hundreds of carefully curated details Amelia had purchased. I saw my daughter standing tall, her bow steady, her face lit with a quiet fire. I saw 17 years of resilience, of scraped knees and early mornings and laughter, too big for the walls of our little house. I saw justice, not revenge, not disruption, but truth breaking through the performance. When the final note hung in the air, trembling like the last word of a prayer, silence clung for a beat longer than expected. Then the applause came, tentative at first, then rolling like thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping, some even cheering. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wet in a way I hadn't seen in years. Amelia stood frozen, her bouquet trembling, her perfect smile cracked open by something she couldn't control. I reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it tight. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the older sister or the accommodating daughter or the woman who always chose silence. I felt like a mother who had given her child back the place she deserved. The wedding resumed, but nothing was quite the same. Lily had claimed the room, and no curated atmosphere could erase it. I sat beside her, shoulders back, unashamed, my father's words echoing in me like a vow, mercy, and a spine. And for the first time in years, I felt both fully alive. The reception glowed with golden light, glasses clinking, and laughter spilling into the air like champagne bubbles. But beneath it all ran a current of unease, an invisible thread tugging at every corner of the room. I could see it in the way Amelia's friends glanced at her with hushed questions in their eyes, in the way her new husband kept shifting uncomfortably, as though unsure whether to congratulate Lily or pretend nothing had happened. The performance of perfection had cracked, and no amount of polished smiles could seal it back together. Lily sat beside me at the long table, her violin resting in its case, now her cheeks still flushed from the performance. People approached her in waves, guests I'd never met offering compliments, one man pressing a business card into her hand, another asking where she studied. She accepted their words with shy grace, her shoulders slowly straightening with each acknowledgement. For once she wasn't invisible. For once she wasn't too young. Amelia, on the other hand, moved through the room like a ghost forced to attend her own haunting. She laughed too loudly at jokes, kissed cheeks with too much force, her movements sharp, brittle. I knew that look. It was the look of someone losing grip on a story they'd tried to control, a mask slipping, despite the desperate glue of pride. Our eyes met once across the room, and in hers, I saw fury sharpened into something almost fragile. But I didn't flinch. I lifted my glass slightly, not in mockery, but in acknowledgement of the truth she couldn't erase. Later, when the dancing began and music pulsed through the room, I stepped outside to the veranda for air. The night wrapped around me, cool and grounding, the muffled hum of the party behind me. I thought of all the years I'd bent myself small to avoid scenes, to keep peace in a family that often chose appearance over authenticity. I thought of Amelia's words, too young, and how they echoed every dismissal I'd swallowed in silence. But tonight had been different. Tonight I had chosen something else. The door opened and my mother stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the stone. For a moment she didn't speak. She simply stood beside me, looking out at the manicured gardens lit by tiny lanterns. Her hands, always perfectly manicured, twisted at her pearl necklace, as though it suddenly weighed too much. She played beautifully. She finally said, her voice quieter than I'd expected. Yes, I replied, keeping my gaze steady on the horizon. Another pause, then almost reluctantly, perhaps. Perhaps we were wrong. The words were brittle, but they were words I had waited my whole life to hear from her mouth. I didn't press them, didn't demand more. It was enough for now that the silence had broken, that she had admitted even a fraction of the truth. When I returned inside, Lily was on the dance floor laughing with some of the other young guests, her eyes alight in a way that made her look even more radiant than she had with her violin. She caught my gaze and grinned, and something inside me loosened a knot I hadn't realized I'd carried since the day I was born into this family's web of expectations. I knew there would be fallout. Amelia would not forget. She would not forgive easily, if at all. But that no longer terrified me. I had given my daughter her rightful place, and in doing so I had reclaimed my own voice. Whatever came next, I was no longer afraid. For the rest of the evening I stayed by Lily's side, my hand occasionally brushing hers, as though reminding her silently, we are enough, we always were. When the night finally ended, when the guests drifted away, and Amelia disappeared into the dark with her husband and her pride, Lily and I walked to the car under a sky full of stars. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." And in that moment, every sacrifice, every wound, every silence I had endured in this family finally felt redeemed. The drive home was quiet, not with the heavy silence of disappointment, but with the kind of stillness that feels sacred. Lily leaned her head against the window, her reflection illuminated by passing streetlights, and I could see the faint smile still resting on her lips. My heart ached with a strange mixture of pride and grief. Pride because she had been seen finally for the brilliant soul she was. Grief because I knew the moment we walked into that reception and she took her rightful place, we crossed an invisible line with Amelia, and perhaps with my parents too. When we reached home, Lily carried her violin upstairs and disappeared into her room without saying much. I lingered in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, staring at the quiet house that had been both my refuge and my cage. I thought back to when Amelia and I were children, how our mother always favored her sharp wit and polished looks while dismissing my softer edges. It was never said outright, but the message was clear. Amelia was the golden child, the one destined to shine, while I was expected to support from the shadows. That unspoken hierarchy had followed us into adulthood, shaping every interaction, every wound that festered between us. The phone rang, its shrill sound slicing through the quiet. I hesitated before answering, already sensing who it might be. Sure enough, Amelia's name flashed on the screen. I picked it up slowly, bracing myself. Her voice came out sharp, trembling with restrained rage. "I hope you're happy, Charlotte. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You turned my wedding into your little showcase." I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let her words wash over me. "Amelia Lily didn't steal anything from you. She only played her music. If that overshadowed you, maybe you should ask yourself why." Her gasp was audible, like I had struck her. "You've always been jealous," she spat, "always waiting for a chance to take what's mine. And tonight, you used your daughter to do it." The accusation cut deep, not because it was true, but because it revealed exactly how she saw me, how she had always seen me. A rival, a threat rather than a sister. I could have defended myself further, but I didn't. There was no use. I simply said, "Good night, Amelia," and hung up. My hands shook, but my spirit did not waver. The days that followed were filled with whispers. Family friends called me, some praising Lily's performance, others tiptoeing around the drama that had unfolded. My parents, however, remained silent. Their silence was worse than any words. It was the same silence they had wielded my whole life, punishment disguised as neutrality. Lily, though, seemed lighter. She practiced more, walked with her shoulders back, even dared to talk about applying to conservatories abroad. One evening, as she played in the living room, her music filling every corner of the house, I realized that what Amelia had meant as an insult too young was actually a gift. Because youth meant potential growth, a future. Amelia had been so blinded by her need for control that she couldn't see it. But I did. I saw it in every note Lily played. Still, the storm wasn't over. At a family brunch a week later, the tension snapped. My parents invited us all as though to smooth things over. Amelia arrived in designer perfection, her smile razor sharp. When Lily and I walked in, conversations faltered. The air grew dense, charged. My father cleared his throat, his way of commanding the room. "Charlotte," he began, his voice cool. "We need to talk about what happened at the wedding." I straightened in my chair, my palms pressed flat against my knees to steady myself. "All right," I said quietly but firmly. He exchanged a glance with my mother before continuing. "You embarrassed your sister. That was her day, not yours, not Lily's." Lily shifted beside me, her face pale, but I placed a hand on her knee under the table, grounding her. "With all due respect, Dad," I replied, my voice trembling but steadying with each word. "Lily deserved to be there. She deserved to be seen as part of this family, not cast aside. I won't apologize for giving her that." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Amelia smirked triumphant, certain they would side with her. And they did. "You owe your sister an apology," my mother said coldly. I looked at Lily, then back at them. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of generations pressing down on me, of always being the lesser, the quieter one, the one who bent so others could stand tall. But not anymore. Not when my daughter's future was at stake. "No," I said, my voice breaking but clear. "I don't owe Amelia anything, not anymore." The room fell into stunned silence. My parents stared at me as though I had spoken blasphemy. Amelia's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her features before anger returned. And in that moment, I realized I had broken the unspoken contract of our family, that I would always submit. The brunch ended in cold goodbyes, but as Lily and I walked out into the sunlight, I felt strangely lighter. For the first time in decades, I had chosen myself. I had chosen my daughter. And though the consequences would be heavy, I knew we were strong enough to carry them. The weeks that followed felt like living in two worlds. On one side was my life with Lily, her laughter spilling through the house as she practiced new pieces, her excited chatter about scholarships and conservatories, her spirit blooming in ways I had always dreamed she would. On the other side was the cold shadow of my family's disapproval, their silence growing louder with every passing day. Amelia's wedding became the story everyone in our circle whispered about. Not the dress, not the flowers, not even the vows, but Lily. Guests told friends who told neighbors, until eventually strangers approached Lily in the market to ask if she was the girl who played the violin at her aunt's wedding. Each time Lily blushed but held her head higher, her name carried not as a burden, but as a spark. For me, those whispers were bittersweet. I had wanted my daughter to be recognized for her gifts, but I hadn't anticipated how much that recognition would ignite jealousy in Amelia and our parents. It wasn't long before the storm broke again. A letter arrived in the mail, thick paper, our family crest embossed at the top. My stomach knotted as I unfolded it. Inside were carefully typed words from my father, but they might as well have been carved in stone. He declared that until I apologized to Amelia, our family name would be closed to me. No more invitations, no more gatherings. I had, in his words, shamed the family. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, tears pricking my eyes. Lily found me there, her violin still in her grip. She read the letter silently, her jaw tightening, her knuckles white against the bow. When she looked up, her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "Mom, if they can't see us for who we are, then maybe we don't need them." Her words struck me like a bell, both painful and liberating. I wanted to protect her from that truth, but maybe she was already stronger than I gave her credit for. That night I burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the ashes curl and rise like decades of silence finally releasing their grip. But Amelia wasn't done. She began to spread her own version of the story, how I had manipulated Lily, how I had orchestrated the performance to steal her spotlight. Old friends called me with hesitant voices, unsure of what to believe. Some drifted away, entirely unwilling to stand in the line of fire. And yet, amid the isolation, new doors began to open. One evening, an email arrived from a conservatory in Vienna inviting Lily to audition. They had seen a recording of her performance from the wedding. Someone in the audience had captured it and shared it online. When I told Lily, she clutched the email to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Vienna, Mom. Do you know what this means? I did. It meant the chance of a lifetime, the chance for her music to carry her beyond the suffocating walls of family expectation. But it also meant letting go, and the thought of that tightened something deep inside me. Still, I knew we couldn't let fear hold her back. "You're going," I told her firmly. "We'll find a way." Preparing for that audition became our world. Lily practiced for hours each day, her music filling the house with a fierce beauty that left me breathless. I watched her fingers dance across the strings, her eyes closed in concentration, and I knew I was witnessing not just talent, but destiny. Amelia heard about it, of course. She called me one night, her voice dripping with scorn. "So this is your revenge, using your daughter to prove you're better than me." Her words hit like venom, but I no longer flinched. "This isn't about you, Amelia," I replied softly. "It never was. This is about Lily becoming who she was always meant to be." She laughed bitterly before hanging up, but her words lingered in my chest. For years I had lived in the shadow of comparison of her victories against my supposed failures. But now I understood Amelia's power over me only existed because I allowed it. And I was done allowing it. The night before we left for Vienna, Lily sat with me on the couch, her head in my lap, like when she was a little girl. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for fighting for me, even when it hurt." I stroked her hair, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Always, baby, always." As she drifted to sleep, I stared out the window at the quiet street, my heart heavy with both fear and hope. Tomorrow, we would step into a new world. Tomorrow, everything would change. The weeks that followed felt like living in two worlds. On one side was my life with Lily, her laughter spilling through the house as she practiced new pieces, her excited chatter about scholarships and conservatories, her spirit blooming in ways I had always dreamed she would. On the other side was the cold shadow of my family's disapproval, their silence growing louder with every passing day. Amelia's wedding became the story everyone in our circle whispered about. Not the dress, not the flowers, not even the vows, but Lily. Guests told friends who told neighbors, until eventually strangers approached Lily in the market to ask if she was the girl who played the violin at her aunt's wedding. Each time Lily blushed, but held her head higher, her name carried not as a burden but as a spark. For me, those whispers were bittersweet. I had wanted my daughter to be recognized for her gifts, but I hadn't anticipated how much that recognition would ignite jealousy in Amelia and our parents. It wasn't long before the storm broke again. A letter arrived in the mail, thick paper, our family crest embossed at the top. My stomach knotted as I unfolded it. Inside were carefully typed words from my father, but they might as well have been carved in stone. He declared that until I apologized to Amelia, our family name would be closed to me. No more invitations, no more gatherings. I had, in his words, shamed the family. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, tears pricking my eyes. Lily found me there, her violin still in her grip. She read the letter silently, her jaw tightening, her knuckles white against the bow. When she looked up, her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "Mom, if they can't see us for who we are, then maybe we don't need them." Her words struck me like a bell, both painful and liberating. I wanted to protect her from that truth, but maybe she was already stronger than I gave her credit for. That night I burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the ashes curl and rise like decades of silence, finally releasing their grip. But Amelia wasn't done. She began to spread her own version of the story, how I had manipulated Lily, how I had orchestrated the performance to steal her spotlight. Old friends called me with hesitant voices, unsure of what to believe. Some drifted away, entirely unwilling to stand in the line of fire. And yet, amid the isolation, new doors began to open. One evening, an email arrived from a conservatory in Vienna inviting Lily to audition. They had seen a recording of her performance from the wedding, someone in the audience had captured it and shared it online. When I told Lily, she clutched the email to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Vienna, Mom, do you know what this means?" I did. It meant the chance of a lifetime, the chance for her music to carry her beyond the suffocating walls of family expectation. But it also meant letting go, and the thought of that tightened something deep inside me. Still, I knew we couldn't let fear hold her back. "You're going," I told her firmly. "We'll find a way." Preparing for that audition became our world. Lily practiced for hours each day, her music filling the house with a fierce beauty that left me breathless. I watched her fingers dance across the strings, her eyes closed in concentration, and I knew I was witnessing not just talent, but destiny. Amelia heard about it, of course. She called me one night, her voice dripping with scorn. "So this is your revenge, using your daughter to prove you're better than me." Her words hit like venom, but I no longer flinched. "This isn't about you, Amelia," I replied softly. "It never was. This is about Lily becoming who she was always meant to be." She laughed bitterly before hanging up, but her words lingered in my chest. For years, I had lived in the shadow of comparison, of her victories against my supposed failures. But now I understood Amelia's power over me only existed because I allowed it. And I was done allowing it. The night before we left for Vienna, Lily sat with me on the couch, her head in my lap like when she was a little girl. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for fighting for me, even when it hurt." I stroked her hair, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Always, baby, always." As she drifted to sleep, I stared out the window at the quiet street, my heart heavy with both fear and hope. Tomorrow we would step into a new world. Tomorrow everything would change. Type continued to receive the next part. The next morning dawned gray, and still the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. Lily and I carried her violin case through the airport, our steps echoing in the cavernous hallways, our hearts pounding with both fear and anticipation. She clutched her boarding pass tightly, her fingers trembling, but her eyes shone with determination. I kept stealing glances at her, marveling at how quickly she had transformed from a girl excluded by her own family to a young woman stepping onto a global stage. The flight itself felt endless, each mile pulling us farther from the weight of Amelia's disdain, my parents' silence, the decades of shadows that had loomed over me. At one point, Lily leaned her head against my shoulder, whispering, "Mom, do you think I'm ready?" I kissed her forehead and answered honestly, "Yes. Because you're not just playing notes. You're telling your story. No one can take that from you." Vienna greeted us with crisp air and cobblestone streets, the city alive with music. Posters for concerts adorned nearly every wall, and the sound of violins, pianos, and cellos drifted from open windows. It felt like stepping into a world built for Lily, a place that could hold her brilliance without trying to dim it. The day of the audition arrived faster than I expected. Lily dressed carefully, her hands steady as she tuned her instrument. I watched her through the mirror, seeing not just my daughter, but every version of myself I had once silenced, every dream I had buried under the weight of family obligation. As she walked onto the stage of the grand hall, the judges seated in solemn rows, my heart hammered like a drum. She played as though the universe itself had poured into her veins. Each note soared, shimmering with defiance and hope, weaving together pain and triumph. I saw the judges exchange glances, their pens pausing mid-scribble. By the time she finished, the room was utterly still, as though no one dared to break the spell she had cast. When she stepped off the stage, her eyes searched for mine, wide and uncertain. I gathered her into my arms and whispered, "Whatever happens, you've already won." Days later, the acceptance letter arrived. She had been offered a full scholarship. My hands shook as I read it aloud, Lily's tears streaming freely as laughter bubbled out of her chest. For the first time, the future was not something to fear, but something to run toward with open arms. Of course, Amelia heard. She called again, her voice laced with disbelief and venom. "You think this makes you superior, that because your daughter plays the violin, she's better than my entire life." Her words no longer pierced me. I listened, then quietly replied, "This isn't about being better, Amelia. It's about being free." And then for the first time in my life, I hung up on her without guilt. The night before Lily left for Vienna permanently, we sat together on the porch, the stars stretching endlessly above us. "Mom," she said softly, "are you going to be okay without me?" I smiled through my tears. "I'll miss you more than anything. But seeing you live your truth will be the greatest peace I've ever known." As she left the next morning, violin case in hand, I felt both the ache of loss and the sweetness of victory. Because in choosing my daughter, I had finally chosen myself. Years later, when I watch her on stage through live streams, her music filling grand halls across the world, I know the battle was worth every scar. I lost a sister, I lost the approval of my parents, but I gained something far greater, the certainty that love and truth will always outlast control and pride. So if you've ever been silenced, dismissed, told you were too small, too young, too unworthy, remember this: your voice, your story, your truth matters. And when you claim it, the world will have no choice but to listen. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment with your own story. Let's keep building a space where no one is ever told they're too young or not enough.